I think letting go is the most powerful thing.
Mm.
I think that you talk about forgiveness and forgiveness of self and forgiveness of others, non-judgment of yourself and non-judgment of others, right? Those are what lead to attachments, and attachments I think there's some positive attachments in life, like some of our loving relationships, a few things. But I think overall we have all these attachments that probably aren't serving us in any way. In fact, they're probably serving us in a bad way, in a negative. And so I think when it comes to letting go, we have to embrace it as a process. And you use the word acceptance a few times today, and I think it comes down to that word, acceptance. It's not just that we forgive. We have to check back with ourselves and say, have you actually forgiven that person? Have you actually forgiven yourself?
Mm.
I mean, you can say you did it, but did you actually do it?
Yeah.
Are you done with the process? Maybe it was this big circle, this cycle, and maybe you forgave, and now maybe it's not as bad, but it's a medium circle, and then you did it again, and maybe it's a smaller circle, but is it done? And so I think letting go is that process of forgiveness, non-judgment. It's loving yourself enough to let go. I think part of letting go is knowing that you're enough, knowing that you're whole inside and that there's light there, even if you can't see it. And if you know that, if you see yourself as whole, if you love yourself, suddenly forgiving becomes easier. Suddenly not judging others becomes easier. And then you're living just this massively more free existence.
Today on The Beautiful Side of Grief, my guest, John Lawyer, has gone from being a soldier to an awakening. And this is a huge shift for anyone to make. So I'm excited to explore with him just what prompted him to do that, and then the journey from having his brain rewired through many years of being a warrior in war situations to then having to undo that and find his way to a place of peace, calm, and purpose through becoming a spiritualist and a universalist. He describes it as coming out of the other side of the swamp of sadness. I think that's such a perfect description. John is now committed to merging this spiritual path into his everyday life. So how about we get into it and hear his incredible story? Welcome to The Beautiful Side of Grief, John.
Thank you so much for having me. And that was a beautiful introduction. I really appreciate it.
You're most welcome. John, I'm keen to have our conversation today as I believe that you are someone who has had to explore a lot of things to get to where you are today. Beliefs, religion, spiritual practices, and so on. And so I believe what you have to share is going to be of great value. So let's start with defining what a spiritualist and a universalist is.
Yeah, as a universalist, I essentially believe that we all have our own unique path. It's going to look different for every person. And that whether you're in this religion, that religion, whether you practice this version of individual spirituality, or that we're probably all practicing very similar things, even if they're in different ways, and that we can really appreciate one another's uniqueness. And basically all of that human thought out there from throughout time around the world is all valid. And that we can come together by asking different questions, seeing different answers, and maybe knowing that the truth is something maybe a little bit ineffable, and that maybe even a little bit of a moving target at times. Yeah. And I think that's pretty much would sum up what I'm about.
I love that way you describe that, because that's what I am. Never really belong to any one sort of thing. I take a bit of everything and mesh it together as to what fits perfectly in my life. And I think that's what you're describing, isn't it? Find what fits for you and, move forward. So are you happy to share the background which led you to reaching this point where you have changed your life dramatically? Because at one stage, I read that you were working in Afghanistan, working 80 to 100 plus hours a week. So there is barely any time to even sleep in that equation. And then healing to find this spiritual path and outlook that you have now.
Yeah, I think that my journey started on that path. I graduated high school. I skipped college and went straight into the U.S. Army as an enlistee and became a counterintelligence special agent. This was before 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just finished my training, gone to basic training, finished my job training as a special agent. And not too long after that, 9/11 occurred. And I spent about 2.5 years of my 5-year enlistment in Kuwait and supporting our soldiers in Afghanistan. I was there for when the U.S. and the West invaded Iraq from Kuwait. And then when I got out of the Army, I basically continued to do the same thing as a civilian, same job in Iraq and then later in Afghanistan. And my experience was, like you said, it's hard to even really know what your experience is when you're that busy. Like I was, like you said, I was working 100, 110 hours a week and then 7 days a week. Very little time to stop and think, oh, what's happening to me? It's almost doing that job that like it takes when you're trying to stop, when you're going after extremists and you're trying to stop spies, you think like them. It almost takes an extremist to catch an extremist kind of situation. So you're completely like involved with it from like your core. So I think that was a great question and a great observation by you, because you lose yourself a little bit in that process of being in this environment. And obviously I didn't know it at the time. It's also, I think one of the most underrated aspects of this journey for me is that I realized years later that I looked back and I go, oh, that was my youth. That's your youth, right? You lose that part of you that is hard to describe, but I think that's a fair description, just losing your youth. And it was something that I wouldn't change because it's made me the person that I am today. But I think that it's this aspect of going through this trauma that's this like low grade trauma that's consistently day to day. Oh, something bad might happen to me now, maybe happen to me tomorrow. I don't know. And then there's these high grade events where you might have survive a ballistic missile attack, where you don't know if it's going to hit the base or if the Patriot missiles are going to intercept it in time, or there's a car bomb that goes off that misses you but was close. So that's, like there's all these things that happen that are big events, but there's also just that low grade, enduring trauma that I think, you don't recognize it while you're in it. It's like that boiling pot, right? You don't realize you're in the boiling pot while you're being boiled. So I think that's what I look back on and think, yeah, I didn't really understand it at the time.
Which is pretty typical of what we do, don't we? We get involved in things, we just go on auto, do what we have to do, and not really step back and take a look at how that's affecting us, or is it really what we want to be doing, until something stops us in our tracks. And something that I alluded to in the intro was I just said about rewiring your brain. Because do you think it's living in this heightened state of fight or flight to a minor degree that causes you to just start rewiring your brain, or is it something else? And you also mentioned that this is something that not a lot of people are aware of.
I do think that it does rewire your brain. And I think that the things that I've learned since I've tried to move past this after I got home, and then I've spent some time at the VA with my therapist and stuff trying to heal. And you learn that it does rewire your brain, like physiologically rewires your brain. I think it spiritually and emotionally rewires it, but I think it also physically rewires it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that holistic idea is not always looked at by society, right? That it's that mental illness or depression or trauma that's in the mind is also this physiological thing as well. And that there's probably all these people out there that are suffering from trauma and don't even know they're in trauma, that they're in it, or that they were in it and now they're lost on the other side of it. So yeah, I think it's really important to think about, how do I become aware of where I'm at in life, where we are in life. I think stopping and considering that is really important to starting to understand, okay, this is trauma, this is grief, this is very, serious stuff.
Yeah, it is. In what ways did it rewire your brain for you, do you think? Did it make you sort of stop feeling, or did it make you, can you just explain for us what that looked like for you?
I think it made me angry.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had some issues with anger and rage that I had to deal with. I dealt with it in a way that wasn't violent towards anyone, but just because you're not violent doesn't mean you're not destructive of it to yourself and to others,
Mm.
I think it made me hyper vigilant, where you never feel safe anywhere. And I was depressed, dealing with that. I ended up with OCD as just a side effect of it all. And then I think there's a fatigue that comes with it that's hard to explain. Some of that may be some other stuff like Gulf War syndrome that they think that some of us might have. But it's hard to differentiate where some of this rewiring stuff ends and where some of the actual physical parts of the job came into as well. I think it's all of that, those very difficult things that come with PTSD and complex PTSD.
Yeah. It's good to understand that, so that when we see other people going through similar types of things, we can have some, at least I don't think we're ever going to really understand, because we're not in that situation that you've been through for years and years. However, it just allows us to go, okay, yeah, I get they've been through a pretty tough time. Because I imagine even just coming out of years and years of that situation to suddenly being home and then having nothing to focus on, nothing to really embed yourself in, that must be truly difficult.
Yeah. I mean, that's that's such an intuitive observation on your part, because when I came home and I was like, okay, now I'm done with that part of my life. I'd been doing it on and off for 12 years over a 15-year period. And I didn't know who I was without that.
Yeah.
I had no concept of identity outside of that. And yeah, and the thing is, it's a terrible thing, the military industrial complex and war, right? This evil darkness is there on both sides on all sides of that. And then you come home, but the thing is, you're addicted to it you're addicted to it physiologically, probably a bit. You're addicted to it mentally and emotionally as well. It's where you got your high.
Mm.
It was an exciting thing. Or people don't talk about that a lot, right? And actually, Sebastian Junger has done some work on that. He was a journalist. He spent time, and a writer. He spent, I think, 18 months at a forward operating base in Afghanistan. He talks about being addicted to war in a really meaningful way. But I think that there was even a comedy. I think it was Tina Fey was in Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, this movie about her being a journalist in Afghanistan. And I thought that was actually a very appropriate movie about addiction to war. So there are some conversations about it, but it's pretty rare.
Which, considering the huge volume of recruits and people going in and coming out of the service and we're talking like a substantial number of people being affected by something that we are just not having conversations about. Yeah, I'm glad that work's finally beginning, but it probably would have helped about 20, 30 years ago, or even after the World Wars, when we had a lot of people coming out with PTSD and it wasn't even being recognized, was it? Gosh. Alrighty. So I know that you've read a lot of leading books on spirituality and thought leaders of our times. And in one of the discussions on the spiritual teachings of Marcus Aurelius, you mentioned that he speaks on our mental well-being and says, "You have within you the power to obliterate many superfluous and disturbing things, for they are entirely in your mind." That's pretty powerful, especially if you are in the habit of reliving certain events over and over, whether it be from a war situation or just being in a traumatic home situation and environment. People just keep reliving these events over and over. So I'd love to hear your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I appreciate that you talk about other traumas because I don't think any trauma is better or worse than any others, or I think
Mm.
all traumas are equal, right? First of all. And I think when it comes to Marcus Aurelius and meditations, I think there's great beauty in this idea that this trauma that we experience, this darkness that we feel, it is in our mind. We talked about the physiological aspect of it, but ultimately a lot of it is in our mind. And often we're in a prison of our own making, right? That's this two-dimensional thing that it's not three-dimensional. We just have to choose to step around it. You know, it's not all around us. We can just walk around it and be free. And I think there's something to that. And I think that I always thought these Stoics were these serious kind of grumpy people, but I think Stoics are actually very living in the moment, present. It's a very beautiful thing, what they have to say.
Yeah. And so I guess this is what you mean, looking for the light in the darkness, isn't it? So it's the understanding that, yep, we've been through all of this, we're experiencing this, it's occupying our mind. But ultimately, it becomes down to a choice of whether we want that to continue or not. And then it's obviously having the tools around that to help you move from that place of it constantly being mind chatter to being in a place of peace and calm. So how did you go from, first of all, did you experience that? Did you experience reliving stuff over and over? And if you did, how did you go from that place?
I did relive it, yes. And then sometimes even when you're not reliving it, there's this like neutral passivity where you're just not moving any direction, right? I think that was a big part of it too. I think overcoming it, I think time is underrated. I think time does heal wounds. I don't think it always has to take time. I think people move at different speeds and it depends on the individual, but I think time is helpful. I think that what helped me is that I was always a very positive person, even in the darkness, even in the depression, in the trauma and the post-trauma. I had a positive outlook. And I think that was very helpful to not get bogged down in the swamp, not get stuck, not sink. And I think every person probably has a different path that's going to say, this is how I made it through the darkness, or this is how I realized I was in the darkness, or all of those things, right? For me, it was positivity. It helped me gain traction and find a way forward kind of out of where I was at.
That positive outlook could also work against you in that you were probably going through a lot of stuff that people didn't even recognize that you were going through because you managed to contain it so well with positivity. Would that be a fair comment?
Yeah, I think so. And one thing I found is that people really didn't want to talk about it. The dark stuff, right? Because people, for whatever reason, shy away from it. And I understand that, but it makes it difficult because you don't have any really outlet to say, here's my thought process behind this and here's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I get that. All righty. So you managed, and you say you were very lucky about this, that you had a therapist who was right into mindfulness and those types of practices, which you believe were really helpful to you to help you just shift gears, so to speak. Was that something that you'd been exposed to at any stage in your life prior, or were those all new practices that you were coming to terms with?
Those were all new to me. I had been raised Christian Southern Baptist and had left the church when I was a teenager. And so, no, meditation and mindfulness practices were totally new to me. It was unexpected to be paired with a therapist in the VA that was aligned with Eastern practices. It was an eye-opening experience, for sure.
And what did you find the benefits of doing meditation? Because for me, that's a life changer for me. Just being able to go into that quiet, still my mind, and when it just opens you to a whole lot of different perspectives. How did you find it for you?
For me, I thought my therapist was really focused on mindfulness meditation. And I think that just being able to understand that you can stop and experience the world around you and be present in the moment. It was very profound. Obviously now I live that way a lot more, but back then I could kind of have an idea of it, but I really couldn't wrap my being around it then. I wasn't in a place where I could fully surrender to that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, was that
so it
because
helped,
you were
but
always...
I still couldn't quite see it.
Was that
Exactly.
always looking forward? Like, what's the next thing I've got to be thinking about and doing and things like that? Because I think many of us in our day-to-day lives are so busy doing that, we forget that right here in front of us is a very beautiful moment, whether that's reading a book to a child or just taking a stroll down the street. We forget to actually just say, this is pretty cool where I'm at right here, right now.
And we're so focused on I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, keep going. Sorry, there's obviously just a slight delay. So, yeah.
Yeah, we're so focused on the past. And then we're also so focused on the future. Sometimes we just forget to live.
Mm-hmm. So what about that inner voice that dictates so much of what we do? That's, our self-belief systems that we've grown up with and things like that. How do we recognize what we need to listen to and what we need to let go of? Because I think that's a huge part of finding ourselves, is allowing ourselves to truly live as our authentic self. But in amongst all of that, and probably heavily so, is a lot of belief systems that may not fit.
Yeah, I think you probably raised one of the great questions of spirituality, and it's, where is the line between the mind and the ego, which are not our true authentic voice, and our intuitive, conscious, universal self, right? That's a great question, because the ego and the mind are really helpful for us because they keep us alive. They kept us alive for thousands of years. They help us live in this quote unquote real world, but they're overactive. They kind of overperform because they are meant to keep us safe and alive. And they question things sometimes when it's probably not super useful. And so finding a practice, finding a spiritual path, finding a construct that works for you, that allows you to separate the line between the mind and the ego and that voice and that intuitive voice within that is your true, purposeful, intentional, aware self. That is, I think, the universal question. And I think it's about finding what really resonates the most for you as an individual. And I think if you look at teachers like Buddha or Christ or Lao Tzu, it doesn't really matter, right? They all say all these different things in different ways because they know it's going to resonate differently with each person, right?
Yeah, so it's just gravitating towards the one that speaks to you. And I guess for me, I know that grief, what I'm doing here with grief, I'm shining a beautiful light on it. I'm saying that there is something beautiful to grief. Now, that goes against what a lot of people believe. And I even recall some early into losing my daughter, and I'd just gone back to work, and I was at a general practice, and I caught up with a colleague, and she said to me, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm just trying to focus on the positives out of this." And she whipped around and looked at me, and she goes, "There are no positives to losing a child. Full stop. No, there are not." And it took me aback for a moment because I thought I was doing so well. And then when I reflected on it and I thought, actually, this is what's working for me. This is how I'm getting through my grief. And her reaction shocked me. And I nearly succumbed to her way of thinking for a moment there. And then I thought, no, hold true to what you believe and what you think. And sometimes you have to walk a dark path or a lonely path, or that, a lot of your friends and family might not be walking with you in the way you believe. But more and more as I do this, I feel like this is, again, something we need to shine the light on. It's about perspective and how you look at things. How have you found your own family's reactions to you doing this huge shift from being in the services to now being the spiritualist, especially Southern Baptist?
I was raised Southern Baptist. My family was actually my nuclear family. My two parents were both actually pretty progressive, but they both came from Southern Baptist backgrounds, so we were still raised in the church. But it's been fairly a warm process for me, mainly because my wife is also fairly spiritual, and we also, in a kind of an odd twist of fate, or whatever you want to call it, we spent most of this time overseas. We spent together. We worked very similar jobs, so that's pretty rare. And I think that enabled us to understand what was happening with one another in a way that was probably helped us both survive it. So I think that's helped us. And the family that we have around us are pretty open-minded people, and so it's been a pretty straightforward process to explain where we're coming from and what we're doing. And we've had quite a bit of support, which has been lovely.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, because I always think it makes it even harder if you don't have that support around you and that understanding. And the thing is that people don't have to understand it all, do they? They just have to see the benefit for you and just love and accept that. Yeah. What about letting go? Why do we need to learn to let go? And what's the importance?
I think letting go is the most powerful thing. I think that you talk about forgiveness and forgiveness of self and forgiveness of others, non-judgment of yourself and non-judgment of others, right? Those are what lead to attachments, and attachments I think there's some positive attachments in life, like some of our loving relationships, a few things. But I think overall, we have all these attachments that probably aren't serving us in any way. In fact, they're probably serving us in a bad way, in a negative. And so I think when it comes to letting go, we have to embrace it as a process. And you use the word acceptance a few times today, and I think it comes down to that word, acceptance. It's not just that we forgive. We have to check back with ourselves and say, have you actually forgiven that person? Have you actually forgiven yourself? I mean, you can say you did it, but did you actually do it? Yeah. Are you done with the process? Maybe it was this big circle, this cycle, and maybe you forgave, and now maybe it's not as bad, but it's a medium circle, and then you did it again, and maybe it's a smaller circle, but is it done? And so I think letting go is that process of forgiveness, non-judgment. It's loving yourself enough to let go. I think part of letting go is knowing that you're enough, knowing that you're whole inside and that there's light there, even if you can't see it. And if you know that, if you see yourself as whole, if you love yourself, suddenly forgiving becomes easier. Suddenly not judging others becomes easier. And then you're living just this massively more free existence.
That term, loving yourself, that's a biggie for many people, isn't it? Because we go, oh, yeah, I love myself. But actually, I do this. I've done a lot of healing work with people. And one of the exercises is about loving yourself. And when you get them to look in the mirror and actually tell themselves that they love themselves, it can be a bit confronting for people. They can be triggered in ways that they had not even realized. And that forgiving is all part of us understanding that there are shadow aspects to ourselves within and what we've done externally. And that's okay, because that's part of the journey to get to this level of awareness that we're at and this understanding. And then the ultimate is just love, I think, learning to love everyone without judgment. And it's not an easy thing to do, is it?
No, it takes work. I think that there's this spiritual side of the world that we live in, the spiritual path and journey that we have. But there's this very practical side of we occupy this quote unquote real world, this shared consciousness that we all have. We're not all going to go live on the mountain and be in the monastery and pray every day. So how do we live with people? How do we live with ourselves, with people?
Mm-hmm. So what about the importance of finding our higher purpose? Because for many of us, we've invested a lot of time studying, getting degrees, or being in the service and counterintelligence. That's probably something that you were extremely good at. Yet, that wasn't your higher purpose. So how do we go about finding our higher purpose, and why is that important?
I think our higher purpose or our dharma, there's other words for it, but I think that finding that higher purpose is really important because I think we all each have a unique higher purpose. I think that it could change throughout our life, but what do we feel that we're put on the world and the universe to do? And I think some of us have an essence of what that is. I think some of us don't even think about that. I think others know fully what that is. And so I think the first step is asking the question, do I know what my higher purpose is? And if you don't, search for it. And if you do have an essence of it, keep peeling that back to understand where it's at. And then once you know, then how do you align what your higher purpose is, your dharma, with your daily life, with your job, with how you go about your activities, your relationships. And I think that alignment with your higher purpose and finding it's all really important to finding joy and peace and calm.
Yeah. And how do you know? Is it exactly as you said, when you find that space where you are peaceful, where you are just loving what you're doing and you're passionate about you doing what you're doing and you just lose all sense of time? Is that how you know that that's your higher purpose? Because I think it can look a trillion different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone's higher purpose can be helping others. Another person's higher purpose could just be not doing much and just sitting in the forest, just chilling out. Mm-hmm. Or another person's could be taking care of animals. There's all these different, like you said, there's trillions of different applications for it. And so finding it is just trying to get an idea of it and then just keep pursuing that idea until you know what it is. And I think that, this goes back to the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita, where aligning what your purpose is with what you're doing every day. How could there be anything more beautiful than that? I think there's a lot of positivity in that concept.
Yeah. You also mention and talk about that you don't have to be perfect or chase it, but to have grace for yourself. And we've been touching on this, but I feel like that is such an important concept as well.
Yeah, I think that having grace for ourselves, the universe maybe have this perfection of oneness and everything. I believe that, but I think that we're not perfect in this like human worldly form that we're in. So we're never going to be perfect. So we don't have to chase perfection. We could be content with that perfection that's deep within us, that self, that divine, whatever you want to call it, from various spiritual ideas and philosophies. But yeah, I think that's what it's really about, is if you can just have grace for yourself and say, hey, this moment's not great, or that moment is hard, or I'm having a bad day, or I'm not doing this, I'm not doing A, B, or C. That's okay. We're not always going to make it exactly how we want it. And life's never going to be exactly how we want it to be, how we think it's going to be. It's going to manifest itself in very different ways. So we just have to have the grace for ourselves to be able to make peace with that.
It's actually that letting go too that allows us to actually see what the universe does in fact want for us. It can be in a completely different version to what we think, and sometimes we're our own biggest obstacles in the way of finding that. So yeah, I love what you say there. So we have thousands of souls who have faced war literally and figuratively, and I suspect many are scarred from those experiences. What do we need to be doing to support people like yourself when you were there in that space, who are feeling broken and having immense sadness?
It's a really good question, and probably a difficult question. I think each person is going to handle it differently. And so we have to approach it with an open mind and an open heart as a society and a community. And I think we have to give those people a voice to be able to say, this is who I am. This is where I've been. This is what I've done. This is what I would like to do. And I think giving a voice to them can help them work through whatever it is that is keeping them attached. And I also think that soldiers are taught that you just have to kind of bottle it up and do the job. And so then when you get out of the trauma, like you not even recognize that you were ever in it. You're taught to be strong, like when I had a top secret security clearance and we weren't even allowed to go to therapists or otherwise we could lose our clearance.
Whoa.
So that's changed now. But when the early years after 9/11, I saw multiple friends get kicked out of the Army just because they went to go seek help. They've changed some of that now.
Yeah. Yay.
But I think that it's just about giving them a voice. It's about listening. And then hopefully we can see a trend where there's a trend towards healing. And I've lost friends after the war, right, to suicide and things like that. I think it's just listening to them and giving them a voice to speak to people who are willing to listen.
And I think wrapped in around that is that concept that in order for anybody to open up about anything, they need to feel safe. And that's sometimes difficult to do when you've been taught to bottle it all up and not trust anybody, not be speaking about this because, you don't know how people are going to react. So I guess guys like yourself who've been through it are perfect because you have an understanding of relatability. You can relate to, maybe not exactly, but to what people have experienced. And I think that's so vitally important, isn't it? So is there a drive to have those wraparound services of ex-servicemen providing these opportunities for servicemen who are trying to find their way just to have that safe space and talk? Is there money invested in that?
I think there's been a lot of progress made on veterans helping veterans and society putting funds towards that. I think there's been a lot of work done on that. I think it's a really good effort has been made. And I think there's more that can be done. Obviously, here in the U.S., we have the VA, and the VA probably helped save my life. I give great credit to them for that. It's a very imperfect organization, though, in many respects, obviously. But yeah, I think that there's always room for more. And I think that when you send a whole generation for 20 years, it's a long time. The West's longest war in a long time. And so I think that, there's definitely space for more people offering support and making sure that people find it. And oftentimes there's a lot of support out there, but you've got to be able to convince the people to come get the help. And I think that's very difficult.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the biggest hurdle, isn't it? People have to want it for themselves. They have to be in that space to be able to then take that next step. Yeah. So what does your life look like now? What is a place that you've reached and how are you living?
I am so much better now. When I came home, like I said, I was lost. It took about 7 years before enough time had passed where I was able to start healing in a very serious way. And I had that moment of kind of enlightenment or awakening or clarity or understanding, whatever you want to call it. And that was about 2 years ago.
Was there any?
So it's been a much warmer existence.
Sorry, can I just
go ahead.
Interrupt? Was there anything specific that brought on that moment?
I was on a spiritual path that I knew of, and it was really as out of the blue. It was a very kind of eureka moment that was not expected. It was very unexpected.
So carry on. Yep.
Yeah. And that was about a little over 2 years ago now. And so I kind of realized that my heart purpose was to help people help themselves, find their wholeness, find their light, so they could walk their own unique path. And I knew I wanted to start an online spiritual community where people can share their journeys with one another. And so I knew I'd like it to be a nonprofit. So I created a nonprofit online spiritual community, and my wife and another woman who's a good friend of ours from the Balkans in Bosnia, she works with us, and we created this online community. We worked on it for 2 years and we finally launched it in October, and a space for people to have peace and calm in this modern online digital world and still have meaningful, authentic human connections, regardless of what their story is, what their trauma is, what their positive path they're walking, what stage or level of spiritual path they're on. Doesn't matter. With whatever belief, come one, come all, that kind of thing.
And I love that part of that community is, and I shared this with you before we went on air, is that you review books, spiritual books or thought leader books. And they have the most amazing artwork that goes along with the narrative as you're talking about them. But I love that you're doing this as well, because for me, it's a wonderful opportunity to get an idea about different religions, different thought processes and ideas about the world without actually having to dive deep into it myself. So thank you for doing that. I love that you're doing that. And I listen to them. I got a little bit hooked on listening to them, but that's great. So I really appreciate that you're doing that. And so you've got that. What else do you offer?
Yeah, we talked about our online spiritual community. You mentioned our YouTube channel with our great artwork that my wife does and the stories we try to tell so we can explain things in simple ways to people, and also offer individual one-on-one spiritual guidance and coaching. I went and got my certified professional coach certification, and we do that as well. It's all nonprofit. There is a charge for stuff, but it all goes back into the community. I don't take a salary. No one takes a salary. Mm-hmm. It's just this thing where we can all have a conversation and we can ask good questions, get answers, and then continue to figure out what this whole universe is made of.
Yeah. I'm glad that you've been on this experience with your wife and your friend to create this community. And just quickly now, because I just thought of this, how did your wife's journey differ to yours in reaching this point? Did it differ, or were you pretty much on the same path?
It differed. She's always been, I think, probably more spiritual than me. She's always been into the natural, like kind of pagan ideas, and very, very calm, very quiet person. And so I think having her be on that kind of quiet path helped me eventually see my own way.
Yeah, a lovely person to have by your side with that type of nature. Very calming.
Yeah.
So I love to finish off with
very calming.
Yeah. I love to finish off with a couple of questions I ask all my guests. So the first one is, what is the best thing that has happened to you today?
Getting up and being positive was the best thing.
That's beautiful. What is something that you are grateful for?
I'm grateful for my health. I think that is the first thing that I'm always grateful for today.
Mm-hmm. And when you have moments in your day that are a little bit dark, you're shadowy, how do you pivot out of those moments?
I have started a while back carrying around mala meditation bead, and it's a physical reminder to just be more aware of getting in a rut or something like that and move through it.
Okay. Just explain to me about those beads. I haven't heard of those before.
They're Hindu meditation mala prayer beads, and it's like a necklace full of stone crystal beads, and like prayer beads for Muslims or the rosary for the Catholics. It's the same thing for the Hindus, and a lot of cultures have variations of that. So it just helps me have a physical reminder to remember to be more like overtly spiritual sometimes if I forget it during the day.
Yeah. It's easy to do too. We're not perfect.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So I'm going to have the links to how people can contact you and that, but just share with us now how people can reach out to you.
Our main website is kishar.org. That's KISHAR.org. And you can find us and our social medias there. And we are also on YouTube at Peace on Your Journey is our YouTube channel. And we're always happy to connect and have a conversation.
Yeah. I'm very happy that you decided to connect with me so that we could have this conversation. It's been an absolute privilege to have you share your journey from warrior to spiritualist and to provide us with some insights of how we can view others going through various things too. I really value that. And yes, I'm very grateful for your time. Thank you, John.
I'm grateful for yours as well. I really appreciate your platform and the message that you put out in the world.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. I hope you got some real value from this episode. If there's a topic you'd like covered, click on the beautifulsideofgrief@gmail.com link or go into the beautifulsideofgrief.com website where you can also leave a review. To get notified of new episodes, hit the subscribe button. And if you know of somebody who could benefit from this episode, please share. And until next time, please be kind to you and take good care.